All right, it's Tuesday. Hopefully everything's going well for you. Today's goal is going to be to review the number properties that we've gone over yesterday, and then also looking back at the conventions and numbers and variables that we've discussed in the past. So remember that our conventions, that's just how to properly write multiplying and dividing with the fraction line and multiplying with the dot or the parentheses, but we'll touch on that. You guys have a warm-up. When you are finished with the warm-up, please sit quietly. Remember that this is a video. We should not have our phones out at all during this video, so please refrain from doing so. If you do finish up, compare your answers with your neighbors. When you're done comparing, you may sit and wait for everybody else to finish up. Hopefully your Tuesday goes excellent. You may now pause the video. All right, we are back. You should have finished the warm-up. If not, we're pausing really fast, but if not, here we're at. Our warm-up, we had a true or false question. Number 1, 2 plus 6 equals 3 plus 4. Number 2, 7 minus 2 equals 2 minus 7. And then finding the value of the expression 5x when. I put this one on the warm-up again because we struggled with it on our quiz. We'll review this again when I get back, but the expression needs to be 5x. Hopefully everybody finished this up. If not, if we still have struggles on this, we need to make sure that we're taking really good notes because this is the area that I really want us to focus on. So, true or false? The first one, 2 plus 6 equals 3 plus 4. I need to see the work. Do not just tell me true or false. You guys know that. Telling me true and false is just a guess. You have to show me the work. So hopefully you have copied down 2 plus 6 equals 3 plus 4 in your paper. From there, 2 plus 6 is 8. 3 plus 4 is 7. 8 does not equal 7. Since 8 does not equal 7, we would state that that statement is false. This information is justifying your statement. I can do it in my head. I don't care if you can do it in your head. I need you to show me the work. I grade the work. On your quiz, some of you chose to not give me enough work. You don't get any points if there's no work. You have to justify those statements. So number 1 was a false statement. On to number 2. Number 2 had 2 minus 7. And on the right-hand side, 2 minus 7. And on the left, it had 7 minus 2. If you're in a rush, you're going to make mistakes on these. 7 minus 2, 5. 2 minus 7, negative 5. Now, it's really, really important that we identify the fact that those two are not the same. 5 and negative 5 are not the same. So make sure that you can recognize that. That means that that statement is also false, which brings up a good point. When you're working on true and false questions, some students panic because we get false for all of our answers or true for all of our answers. As long as you have something that justifies it, and in this case we came up with something that justified it. For example, the first one we had that 8 does not equal 7. It's justified. It is a false statement. Trust in yourself. When we get to a multiple choice test, if you have 5 or 6 false statements back to back to back, go back and make sure you can justify those false statements. It'll help you out. Next, find the value of the expression 5x. Our expression is 5x. You need to then remember what that means. Hopefully we came to the conclusion that when two numbers are directly next to each other, two numbers, again, directly next to each other, then those two numbers are multiplying. So that should be 5 times x in some way or fashion. Hopefully you remembered that. Then what it's stating is that they wanted the x value to equal 2. Notice you have an x value. They want the x value to equal 2. So we're going to plug in for the x, 5 times x, we're going to plug in a 2. That is all they wanted. And a lot of us have made that concept, this connecting point, way too difficult. Don't make it as hard as you think it is. Just look what it's asking. It wants us to use the expression. We know an expression doesn't have an equal sign. Since it doesn't have an equal sign, we're just going to simplify whatever it asks. It wants our x value to be 2. Since our x value is 2, we plug in 2. When we plug in 2, 5 times 2 then just becomes 10, and you are done. Notice there's no equal sign anywhere down here. The only equal sign we had was in the original problem when they stated that the x value was equal to 2. We just plugged that in where the x value is. So 5 times 2. Which then, if we look back on the other one, they didn't want 2, they wanted negative 2. If you couldn't get the first one, then there's a chance that you messed up on the second one. So Wrong button. The second one, you are no longer plugging in 2, you should be plugging in when x is -2. So -2, still going in for the x value, so it's 5 times -2. Now you have to go back and remember your rules. It's a positive value times a negative value, and a positive value times a negative value ends up being negative. So you should have had -10. Do not in any circumstance, under any circumstance, go back to your work and just add in a negative sign. If you're an individual that went back and you're like, oh, it's supposed to be negative, and you added in the negative, you don't learn. Remember that we just cross out our answer if you had 10, and you would rewrite -10 out to the side to hopefully remember that a positive times a negative is a negative. So that was our warm-up. Now, again, today we're reviewing. Today I will give you tons of time for classwork, which means you might finish your classwork. If you finish your classwork, you know your job, you go back and you check your answers. When you're done checking your answers and you've completed everything for the day, then you'll be on free time. Today is a review again. Make sure that we're taking care of our business. Next. So, because we're reviewing, I'm putting this problem up. I want you to do this problem all on your own. We are going to pause the video now. Okay, we made it back. We are using the equation 5n equals n5. Number one asks, what property guarantees that the equation is true for any number n? All right. Number 2 asks, in the equation above, which way is using proper conventions to multiply? Again, we're reviewing. We're reviewing our properties. We are also reviewing our conventions. It's a review. We should know these things. So if you do not know these things, then I suggest that you take some notes. You will be accountable for this. So reviewing. Here is our reviewing. What property? All right, maybe we don't remember our properties. Those were yesterday. We didn't write them all down. I completely understand that. So let's look at our properties. So yesterday's stuff. Here's our properties. First property, the identity property of addition. That's adding 0. All right. Well, we're not adding 0, so it's not that property. The commutative property of addition. Well, hold on now. We got addition, addition, addition. Are we adding in this problem at all? No, I would say that in this equation up here, we are most definitely not adding. Hopefully we come to the conclusion that we're multiplying. So we're not looking at that. We're going to be looking over here at multiplication. So our multiplying property. First one, identity. Your identity is who you are. You can't add anything to you. You can't multiply you by anything to change it. So our multiplication of identity is multiplying by 1. When you multiply by 1, the answer stays the same. 7 times 1 is 7. 16 times 1 is 16. A times 1 is A. We go back to our stuff. Were we multiplying by 1? No, we're not multiplying by 1, so that is not what we're doing. Commutative property. The commutative property, remember we talked about that idea of commuting. When you are commuting, you go from A to B and B to A, and they happen to be the same. So A times B is equal to B times A. A times B, B times A. When we go back over here, notice we have sum 5 times n equal to n times 5. So what property guarantees that the equation is true? Well, the property that we're looking at is the commutative property of multiplication. That is what we are looking at. So the answer to number 1, the commutative property of multiplication. Something of value. You cannot give me an answer that is stating that it is just the commutative property. You have 2 commutative properties. If we go back to yesterday, you had a commutative property of addition. You also had a commutative property of multiplication. They are not the same. One is an adding, one of them is multiplying. You need to tell me that it's the multiplication piece. So the first part we should have is the commutative property of multiplication. 5 times n is exactly the same as n times 5. Conventions. All right, whether or not you remember conventions is different. That was not exactly yesterday, that was prior to that. We had conventions on our last quiz. Your conventions are how to write multiplication. So basically what we're asking is if this is the two ways that I wrote it, you either wrote it as 5n or in 5. If you were an individual that wrote it which way would be correct, hopefully you can conclude that the appropriate way to write it is this one. Remember that we do not write it as in 5, it should be 5 in. So your answer there should be 5 in. That is using appropriate conventions. Things that you might have wrong. Please don't erase if you're an individual that put the dot in between them. Don't do that. I'm all right if you had the parentheses, but we were using the equation up above. It was using this equation. They don't have parentheses. It's just 5 in. I just want 5 in. So hopefully you had 5 in for that one. Again, as we're looking through that, properties are something that you're going to have to know. Properties are something that you're going to have to know. In this case, the commutative property of multiplication, you have to make sure that you use multiplication. Don't just tell me commutative property. And then also remembering your conventions, how to multiply things. In this case, 5 in. Okay. I'm leaving the properties up again. The properties need to be in your notebook. If you didn't copy them down yesterday, that's fine. I want them copied down today. You don't have to use a bunch of room for this. I don't need it to be something gigantic. I do need you just to be able to identify things. You could simply write identity add, identity multiply, and then put the example. You could leave out property of, because if you notice, property of is on all of them. Zero property multiplying, associative property of multiplication, right? You could build a table exactly like this, but I need you to know all of these. Realistically, I'm hoping that we can start just understanding the words that's going on. You have an identity that's keeping the number the same. So when we add, you're adding 0. When you multiply, we're multiplying by 1. Commuting, that's traveling. A plus B is the same as B plus A. If it's adding, we're adding. If it is commuting and we are multiplying, we're multiplying. Notice A times B is B times A. Associative property, it's who you associate with. If A is associating with B and then add C to the group, that's the same as A added to the group of B and C. Similarly with multiplying. And then lastly, that idea that when you multiply any number times 0, you get 0. You need to know all of those. So that's a review from yesterday. Remember that things have to be written properly. We're not putting dots in between everything. A times B can be written as just AB. Your classwork for the day is as follows. When you are done with it, I need you to check your answers. There are worksheets that will be handed out. If you do not finish the worksheet in class, then you need to make sure that you take it home and finish it. I will put both this assignment and the one from yesterday in the gradebook when I return. So we will go over those tomorrow. Best of luck. Have a great night.